I'm Mario Martinez Jr., CEO and founder of Ingresso, and we are the creators of flymessage.io, the free personal writing assistant and text expander application. On each episode of this podcast, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you grow your sales numbers at scale. So, get your pen and paper or iPad and keyboard and start taking notes as you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Modern Selling Podcast. And today I've got my boy, my friend, Mr. Richard Harris. You actually have heard him on this show before. I had him in a few years ago. And by the way, we are in our 7th season now, over 250 episodes going strong here on the Modern Selling Podcast. And I'm excited to bring Richard back. He is the CEO of the Harris Consulting Group, and he has just published, or is about to publish, a brand new book. And you're going to love it, guys. The Seller's Journey. Richard, welcome to the show, my man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. And dude, why are you so mellow? Why you down? Something wrong? You okay? So holy mackerel. God, you were shot out of a cannon. It's amazing. I love it. So good to see you.
I love that one. I love that one. For all of you, I was spending some time talking to Richard a second ago, and he's like, hey, how's everything going with Fly Message? And I said, look, let me show you the vision. And I said, this is what we've done. Here's what we did. We are now these 5 quadrants, and now we're bringing a product under one thing. And he's like, and he goes, what did you say? What was your exact response?
I just said, so what have you been up to?
So what have you been up to? Yeah. What's taking you so long? Man, I love, it's been fun having this journey here on the Modern Selling Podcast, and, really taking time to have all those that are listening in. And actually, I've closed deals. I've had customers, folks that are listening in right now. They're actually users of Fly Message as a result of the podcast. It's been a great show, man. So appreciate that. I got to bring the excitement, got to bring the energy. That's what people are expecting from me. And hey, this is actually a new look. I'm rocking the beard, man. This is the first time in my life.
I noticed it earlier.
I've never had a beard before in my whole entire life. So this is age 46, and I finally decided to grow a beard.
Good for you. Good for you. So,
well, man, do me a favor. Some people may or may not know the great Richard Harris, but give us a little background about yourself, bro, and then about the Harris Consulting Group. And then we're going to get into, actually, I have a very special question for you before we get into the seller's journey.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Richard Harris. Grew up in sales all my life. Was telling someone the other day, like, I owned stock because of my parents at the age of 6 in Texaco. And I'm like, so how much of that gas station do I own? And they're like, none. So sales has kind of been in my blood. I'm one of the few people who were went to college, and I didn't know I was going into sales, but I knew I was going into business. And, my first job in high school was working at the Gap. So I'd had all this experience. So that's sort of the quick version of that. But, what do I do now? I do sales training and go-to-market strategies with founders, specifically teaching people how to earn the right to ask questions, which questions to ask and when, so they understand the humanity of the sales process, not just the functionality in every step and every stage and all those things. There's a humanity piece, which I know we're going to dig into. So that's the big thing. That's what the Harris Consulting Group does. And it's me. Unless you ask my kids, they all think they own a percentage of the business. I'm like, no, it's like my Texaco. You own nothing. So,
well, they're enabling you, and hopefully, someday in the future, someone will take over the business and keep carrying the torch.
Yeah. Unless you want to buy it, I'd gladly take an offer. So, I'm listening. I'm open.
Fair enough. Well, you've been a great sales influencer, and someone that, of course, I've known and respected for a long time. And all of you listening in, the neat selling, that's actually what I think Richard is probably the most well known for. That's all about you, right?
Yeah, that was me. Just how am I going to differentiate myself when I started this business, right? And at that point, BANT's been around forever, but Annam was going on big time. If you remember Annam, right?
I don't even remember what the acronym stands for.
Authority, need, something in money. But and I was like, well, I need something, right? And so I came up with this thing, and it stands for need, the economic impact of that need, access to authority, and timeline. And I felt like that was much more modern, because even 10 years ago, you never got to the authority figure. You had to get access to them, right? And economic impact isn't about budget. It's about how painful is it right now? How painful is this dollarization of their pain? So that's where it came into play. And originally I was going to call it Nate, and I was going to have a little character drawn and all this stuff. And then I was like, well, no, I wanted to do neat. And then when I did neat, it's a long story, sorry. It looks like a compass, right? I've got a north, an E on the east side, and then A's at the bottom and T. And so I thought, oh, the compass is kind of cool. And so I'll go with neat instead of Nate, and trademark it and all that stuff. So that's the quick version.
That's the history there. Well, listen, before I get into talking about the seller's journey, everybody wants to know, man, something juicy. Tell us something nobody knows about you, even if they're looking at any or all of your social profiles.
It's been out there a little bit, but I'm willing to bet nobody will know this one, is that my wife and I were married on 7/7/7, and that date fell into our lap. It was someone canceled at the last minute, and we were like, okay, we'll take it. We had no plans for it. Our oldest son was born on 7/7/08 on our 1-year anniversary. And no joke, he weighed 7.7 pounds. And when you put all those sevens together, there's 7 of them. So that's something most people don't know about. That's unique and kind of fun.
Now that is eerie. Wow, interesting. Okay, well, that's mine doesn't align as well as yours, but my wife and I were married on 07/06/08.
Oh, cool.
So we got a 6, 7, 8 inside there, but it's in opposite order, 07/06/08. Both of our boys were born on the 9th of an individual month. So January 9th, 01/09, and then 06/09. And both of them were born at the 6 o'clock hour.
That's amazing. That's cool. So you got the same thing.
Yeah, it's yours is better though. Yours is the 7 sevens.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting when you put them all together. And the fact that you were married on 7/7/7, that's also cool.
Yeah, thank you.
So biblically, people might think that it's the sign of completeness. Yeah. So make sure you don't screw that one up, huh?
No, no doubt. No, and for everybody who's wondering, no, it doesn't help in Vegas that much. It doesn't help in the lottery, So, but it's a fun story, right? You can't write that stuff. It just happens in life.
It just happens, and it makes for good conversation when you're sitting around a table to give someone to get to know you, and you'd be like, here's a fun fact. That's actually pretty cool. Well, listen, the seller's journey. You are about to launch the book, and feel free to grab it if you've got a copy next to you. Show it on the screen, because those who are listening by audio, they can't see it, but those that are on video, there you are right there, The Seller's Journey.
There it is.
What's the subtitle? It says Your Guidebook to Something. What is it again, Richard?
Yeah, Your Guidebook to Closing More Deals with Neat Selling.
All right. So what was the draw behind writing this book? Why did you do it? What started it? Give us a background.
So one, long overdue. Right. If I were really smart, I'd have written it 4 or 5 years ago. I think it would have done a little better for me. I mean, business has been great. But the main reason I think most of us in this space write a book is that it's a calling card, right? It's one more thing to talk about. Someone tends to appreciate the value they can get out of a book. For those who are interested in self-learning, they enjoy it. And it's like a calling card. It's like, oh, it's Richard. He's quote unquote, a legit author, not the author title that LinkedIn gives you when you write a post. I don't know if I'm an author. Like I'm a little more humble than that, but all my friends and family are saying it. So, so it must be true, right? Like I guess I am that wonderful if my mom says I'm an author. So.
Well, if mom says it, then you better believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because mom always tells you what's true.
Yeah, well, mom also tells me how to rearrange the kitchen, even though I'm 55 years old. So, so take it with a grain of salt.
Gotta love mom.
Yep. There's a 2-state buffer rule between me and my mother, and she knows it. So, all right, yeah.
So it was time to write the book, and it was time to put it all together. What was the problem, the issue, the challenge that you saw that, kind of makes the seller's journey different and it stands out from a lot of the other sales books that are out there?
Yeah. So the main one is that I do not believe there's anything called a buyer's journey. I think it's a lie and a myth. I think the only thing the buyer has is an experience, right? The only place they may start a journey is when they go to the app store. Okay. So yeah, but something happened to make you go to the app store. There was some experience, right? You're talking for me in sales training, right? And even for you for Fly Message, right? Is something's happening, or the lack of something is happening is an experience. And therefore they have to go look for something. And that journey is created by us, the seller, and in fairness, marketing. So it's a buyer's experience and a seller's journey. And you have to bring those two things together, and you've got to do it in a way that's relational, appropriate, human, right? So that was the impetus of like, well, why am I writing this book? Because I think there's a good story here. And then also I'm a tactician. Like, I tend to be better at the tactics than I do the strategy at a high level. Like, I have friends who are, someone like you would be someone like, help me figure out this strategy, Mario. But I'm very tactical. So then there's 13 tactics that are not in people's playbooks that are in the book about, how to use and versus but, or negotiating with procurement, or reducing discounts. So anyway, I'm going to stop promoting the book. Sorry. There it is.
Well, let's actually deep dive into some of these tactics that you talk about in helping close deals, right? And versus but, and what was the one about procurement? I'm curious.
Yeah, the one about procurements, partially is how to negotiate. Well, is really sort of how to negotiate, but the main impetus there is that procurement's not the enemy, and they don't want to be perceived as the enemy. And would you believe it? Procurement wants to talk to you very soon in the sales cycle, not at the end. And we've all been coached to think it comes at the end because it's kind of like wrapping up the process and all that stuff. And in most cases, that's the worst time to bring them in. And it's not our fault. It's our champion. It's someone who doesn't even know internally how to work with. Has anybody here ever had training on how to talk to your internal procurement team? No. Did anybody ever talk to their internal procurement team to say, when would you want to know if the price was this much, or this much? Very few of us. And so that's one of the topics that's in there. And then it talks about, well, how do I approach them? What do I say? How do I handle it? How do I make sure that I don't sound like I'm the enemy? How do I make sure that I show that I'm on their side? Because they got a job to do too. And then there's, how to navigate discounts and stuff. But that's why it's in there, is because I don't think anybody's taught it or been talking about it enough.
I've got some very strong opinions about procurement and the role and function that they serve, and or what I would target as whether or not they bring value. But we'll save that till we get to that part. Let's talk about and versus but. And we're not talking about B-U-T-T. So talk a little bit about that, some of the strategies that you bring out in the seller's journey to help us close more deals. What should sellers be thinking about the use of these two words: when, how, where, etc.?
So, I think a lot of people know this. I think we don't consciously make the effort. And is additive, and it's an agreement. It means I agree with you. Hey, Mario, that's a unique position. And I'm curious, would you be open to a different idea for just a minute? That's me saying, and Mario, I'm not sure my idea is better. And I'm agreeing with Mario, right? On the flip side, I say, hey, Mario, that's a really good thing, but what about this? Well, anything I just said before, but, no longer exists. I just disagreed with them. And so it turns people off. I knew I was going to write this part of the book, and I wrote the book in such a way that when I got to this part of the book, I didn't count, but I had the word, or whatever I was using, count it. I used the word and over 1,000 times. Mario, how many times do you think I used the word but?
I'm going to guess 0.
No, that's not possible. I mean, I guess it is possible, but I didn't do that.
You don't say, but I don't know. I don't know what the guess would be.
About 85 times.
Okay, so a significant difference between 1,000 to less than 100.
Yeah, and I did that because I wanted to make sure people who were reading
got the point.
That I'm not, yeah, not only got the point, and I just wanted them to understand that I'm not trying to contradict something they already know. Look, there's tons of stuff. There's tons of sales books. I don't agree with everything. I don't expect everybody to agree with me. And in fact, the very first sentence in my book has my email address. So you can email me and tell me you hate it, and I'll send you your money back. And I just wanted people to understand that I get that concept. And theoretically, by the time they get to that part of the book, it resonates.
All right. So, and should be used more than but.
Mm-hmm.
And
mm-hmm.
we should make a conscious effort when we're speaking to our buyers, influencers, coaches, to try to show agreement wherever possible.
Yeah. And you can use and disagree. I disagree. Hey, Mario, that's a really unique perspective. And can I share something else with you? Doesn't mean, and I'm sharing. I'm not forcing it on Mario. I'm just going to share it. It's up to Mario to decide if he wants to accept the knowledge of the share and if he likes it or not. And nobody's ever going to say, no, you don't want to share anything. The two places I tell people the most to do this are, one, when you're talking about the competition, because we internally get very defensive ourselves and we hate it when it comes up. Oh no, the competition, right? And I think the other place is when you are negotiating on commercial terms, like any place where there's extra tension and anxiety, I think is a great place to try this tactic and see if it helps. And it's not 100%. There are times you could do, but I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying be mindful of it.
So I really like the way you broke that down, as you should be mindful of this when you're talking about the competition and when you're negotiating commercial terms with whoever it might be internally. Yeah. And the idea is that it forces you as the individual to actually think about how you can phrase something that would show that you're in agreement, or that you are at least not confrontational with the word but.
Yeah, I think it's more about the lack of confrontation, which, and there's like 4 things I should be adding back to the book, but it's too late. So I think that's the best way to say it. And I didn't even say it that way, so thank you, is that it helps reduce the confrontation and the friction of those uncomfortable conversations when it works. And it's not always going to work.
I will say this. I'm trying to play around with it here. Well, here on the podcast, obviously, as you can see. And it's forcing me to pause and think through what I want to say, even if I don't necessarily agree with something. And when I do that, it actually makes me slow things down a bit. And I'm thinking, maybe I need to do this at home with my wife, and I might be a little happier.
Yeah. But why would I do that?
Exactly.
It does slow you down a little bit. It does sort of force you to think strategically, which I really think is super important about sales, right? We are so taught to go. And I know this is important to you too, is that if we're not careful, that reduces the humanity, right? It takes away the human aspect of the conversations. Any tactic we can use to slow ourselves down, I think, is a good tactic. This just happens to be one of them.
And I find myself as a really fast talker. Obviously, in the beginning of the show, you saw me like, boom, just unleash, just super excited. Now that we're into the meat of the podcast, I still speak fast, for sure, absolutely. And that's part of the hype, is part of the excitement, is part of who I am naturally. My wife constantly says to me, it's just, you're talking way too fast. You're too excited. I'm like, I'm not even excited. This is normal. And we've been married for 15 years. I'm like, I'm totally normal, honey. Everything's normal. She's like, no, it's not. You're way too fast. Let me record you. But when you do these types of intentional changes to your thinking process, like and versus but, when you do that, it forces you to slow down and think, because not every buyer can accept the fast-paced talking individual that's going to be rattling off words just like this. Rather, they're processing what it is that you're saying, and they're formulating what they should say next, or what might trigger a response or a feeling or emotion or something like that. So this helps us all together really slow down to think and put ourselves in the, what you call the buyer's experience.
Yes, the buyer's experience.
Yeah, it really ties back into that buyer's experience. Am I wrong?
You are correct. You are 100% correct. I have a test for you, though. Or not a test, but you were talking about your conversation with your wife and how she says this, and then you rambled like Mario does, and you said but, which meant you were disagreeing with your wife. So, oh crap, you caught me. Make sure she goes back and hears that episode, so that part. But anyway, yeah, I agree. It is about the experience that we have and that we can offer to people through a journey. There is a journey. We just want to make it meaningful to them.
All right, let's talk about procurement, negotiating with procurement. Now, I believe many sellers in this mid-market segment oftentimes don't get to a procurement organization when they're selling to mid-market. That's usually at the line of business and legal. That's usually the folks you've got. Procurement is generally for what I've seen in that Fortune, maybe 1,000. It could be lower. It could be absolutely lower. But definitely the Fortune 1000 and above, you're going to usually find some sort of procurement individual inside there.
Yes, and we can also think about it as the CFO.
Okay.
Because the CFO rolls the same way that a procurement team does, right? They're busier. They don't go do the shopping around like a procurement team. They don't necessarily go do all the research. They sort of delegate it back. There's still a lot of similarities in that. So as people are listening to this, keep in mind that this isn't just about procurement. I wrote it that way, and we'll talk about the suggestions I have. But it aligns when you're talking to that CFO or that CEO, and even the VP of sales. Like sometimes if you're selling to a VP, everybody's trying to save a dime, including us. So there's lots of ways. So what do you want to know specifically, though? I'll go wherever you want on this one.
Well, let me just take a step back here, and I'm positive that I'm sure I have somebody in procurement that listens to the Modern Selling podcast, for sure. So everything I'm saying here is based upon experience, not based upon talking about any one individual. So I think that's super important to identify. That's my disclaimer there for now, because now I can unleash the full power of my thinking here. With that in mind, look, I have negotiated $120 million contracts, and I've negotiated down to a $2,500 contract, right? And everything in between. I have never had an experience where procurement added any value.
Yep.
I have never had an experience where procurement added any value. In fact, if I can think back on every single sale across 27 years where I've ever engaged with procurement, it was the business individual who basically did all the negotiating, all of the identification of the who, the what, the how, and then passed it off because procurement was just a rubber stamp process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, I think there's some value in some cases where you can start gleaning some information from a procurement person to help you through process. But in most cases, it's the budget owner, the business owner who has the budget, not procurement. So procurement is more of the rubber stamp. Do we have net 45? Do we have this? Do we have that? Can we take risk on this? Can we take risk on that? And so that's where I've seen that. And so I'm curious about your experience with negotiating with procurement and when you bring them in and how that process works that you've seen.
So there's a couple of things. So one, this conversation came from a good friend of mine, Alan Tarkowski. If you've never had him on, you should have him on. Really smart guy. He was coaching me on this. I then had client negotiations with General Electric. And then I came up with this idea about a year and a half ago. And I've done some podcast hosting with procurement people from Mercedes-Benz, with a very large software company, one of the two biggest, who I'm not allowed to mention, but you can probably figure it out. And I've had several conversations, and they actually go in and they teach some of this stuff. They actually do teach. So I had to your point, okay, now we're talking about the Fortune 100 or the Fortune 50. Get it, no worries. That being said, I've talked to other procurement people and to kind of confirm, and they're like, yeah, that's kind of what I would like. So the first thing to remember is that procurement's not the enemy. They have a job to do too. Depending on the organization and how big they are, procurement's job is also to go research what's in the marketplace. Now, I don't know if that's been your experience, or by the time you got to them, Mario, that it was kind of like already a done deal, right? So that's a part of it. Now, what procurement doesn't have the power to do, theoretically, but I think they scare the hell out of us, is if I'm into one of these big contracts, I'm not talking about a $2,500 contract, to make procurement could say, well, we're just going to have to go with the competition. Well, if I've already put in 50 hours with my person, and believe me, you probably have, I will then turn around to procurement at that moment and say, well, I'm a little confused. I've spent this much time on this. Your team has spent this much time on it. What's the difference in the delta here that you're talking about? Okay, 2%. I get it. Is that really worth them going and doing another 50 hours of this and going back to security and IT and all this stuff? Because if it is, I'll go back to the champion and we'll communicate this. I'm hoping we can find a way to work this out. So procurement doesn't always have all the power that we think they do. Right? Now, there are times where a procurement person might say, we're not buying from a startup unless you discount it. Right? Now you got to still have a negotiation and a conversation around it. That being said, they don't have as much power as we think they do. So that's the first thing. Second thing, because of what I was saying, procurement wants to see it sooner than later. They don't want to be there at the end of the, in the last 2 weeks of December with everything. And it's kind of like, if we can say that to our champion internally, like, hey, and you find that this is the best way to say it is, look, hey, our most successful and happiest customers, Mario, have brought us in at this point to talk to procurement because we know there's a lot of back end stuff over there. How comfortable are you with that right now? So I'm asking for permission. I'm not demanding it. I'm not saying, well, when can I talk to them? It's like, I'm giving them this, hey, this is what happy people do. Or saying, hey, just to make sure you don't have to go back to procurement and relook at 4 other things, which might happen. Our experience has been our happiest customers introduce us sooner so we can get that process rolling. And because a lot of salespeople are champions, if you're a buyer, you don't know that either. You don't know how procurement works other than that piece. I agree with you, Mario. They often are a rubber stamp. It's got to go there. The question is, depending on the size of the deal and the company you're working with, it can feel more adversarial than I think we want it to, based on the fact that that's just because that's what we've always been told.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that I've seen is when a procurement person comes into the very first discussion looking for additional discounts.
But that's so easy to handle. It's so easy. It's so easy. So first thing is, whenever you talk about pricing or budget, anytime they bring up those words, because they will, I immediately say, more than happy to talk about commercial terms. I shift that word specifically because commercial terms means there's an exchange of money for goods and services that have value. If it's a budget or a price, all that means is sell X27 on somebody's frickin' spreadsheet, right? So one, it's a mental game. Switch it to commercial terms because it implies a negotiation. I also learned it from a guy from England, and I was like, that sounds really professional. I'm going to use that word. So, of course, he had an English accent, so that, in America, we always think that that's way cooler. So that's the first thing, right? The other thing that I will say around discounting is, okay, well, what kind of discount? Here, role play with me, Mario. Be procurement. Tell me what kind of, tell me, you want a discount.
Richard, we want to have a discount because we feel like this is a little bit too expensive for us, and the budget, frankly, doesn't quite allow this.
Totally understand that, and commercial terms are always important. Just out of curiosity, Mario, what's comfortable for you?
Well, what we'd like for you to do is put your best foot forward and your best pricing.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Mario. I get it. That feels a little unfair, like a teeter-totter. Our pricing's based on what the market bears. We've done a really good job of understanding it. And if you're asking me for something, I'll entertain it. I just think you should go first since you're the one asking. What would you really like it to be that makes it simple?
Got it. Are we still role playing?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, keep going. Well, what we've seen in terms of competitive bids for this is roughly there's a 30% delta where you need to be.
Got it. So, and I totally understand. I respect that. It sounds like they're a little desperate, and I'll explain why. When I was talking to Sarah, who's really going to be the user and the decision maker, Sarah explained that we beat this competition here, and this competition there. And in addition to that, the pain that y'all are experiencing, it's about a $250,000 a year pain. So, our service is, $60,000. You're asking for 30% off. You're asking for a $20,000 difference. I appreciate it. I respect it. I guess the question is, for $20,000 versus a $250,000 pain, and it's going to happen every year, is that worth making Sarah go back and spend another 15 or 20 hours of her time on this, and then another 2 or 3 hours of your time and legal's time? I mean, it's an option. I just want to make sure I understand everything from your perspective. What do you think?
I could save $20,000. That's what I would do.
And they won't be able to do these three functions that have an economic impact of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what you're doing is you're really turning that conversation into what it is that you knew or found out or researched prior to this conversation that helps you put together a business case for the sales opportunity. And that makes a lot of sense. But I think the missing gap here, Richard, is what I see is most sellers don't have those details that you just mentioned.
And that's what economic impact is. That's when you figure out someone's pain, because that pain is the dollarization of the problem. Economic impact is about how much it's affecting you now. ROI, which is another scare tactic, is bullshit. It's about a return on some future thing that nobody can actually truly predict. And if I can address the economic impact, which I did, I effectively talked about the ROI. So part of this problem, because I get people asking for negotiation training all the time, it's not the negotiation training, it's the fact that they suck at discovery skills because they can't get to economic impact. Right now, here's the one other piece. This is the killer piece, is to say, hey, Mario, I hear you, and I understand you're looking for some discount. Here's what we can do. There's a way for both of us to leverage this, this pricing and commercial terms you're talking about. We can offer 2% for marketing support with a customer quote, another 2% for a case study. And that's presuming y'all have a good success, right? If we don't, I know you're not renewing. We can also offer another 3% on prepayment of a contract and another 2% on, a multi-year contract or more licenses. Which of those seems the most appealing to you?
Yes. So in that case, you are giving, but you're getting. And that's a really nice way. It reminds me of a conversation I just had. As you know, we're in our last half of our pre-seed round. And I was going through a call with a VC. This was the 5th call. And I had 4 calls already with each of the founders. And I thought, what is it that they want to know on this call that we haven't already talked about? And I was just sitting there thinking, and I was thinking, because I also invest in companies personally myself. And I was thinking, if the company's been around for almost a year, what would I want to know? I'd want to know their pipeline. So what I did was I turned around and I said, let me go look inside of HubSpot, because, you know, I've always mandated the use of HubSpot for the pipeline. And I went back and I looked and I was like, oh my God, shame on me, shame on me. I had them all in my head, but none of them documented. So about 30 minutes before the call with the VC, I put them all into the pipeline. And sure enough, on that call, they turned around and they said, well, tell me what does the sales-led growth motion look like? How are you gonna, how are you gonna make this happen? And I said, are you asking to see my pipeline? And they said, we'd love to see the pipeline. Do you have a pipeline to show? I said, well, absolutely. Let me show you. And you're live, and they wanted to go through each deal, right?
That's economic impact.
Yeah, you anticipate that need, but I think that is a missed step and a lost art, where you show up to a discussion and you haven't anticipated the need. And what you just demonstrated there is anticipating an individual needs. Like, I'll give you 2% in exchange for a case study, 3% in exchange for.
Yeah. So there's one more that I will throw in there that I forgot to throw into the role play, because when you get to the bigger companies, they're not going to give you a quote, and they're not going to let you, the other one is, oh, we do 2% for a quote, and 2% for a logo, and 2% for a case study, and 2% for prepayment, and 2% for a longer contract. The other one that everybody can negotiate with, and procurement really doesn't give a shit about, is the net terms. Everybody wants net terms of 60, right? If you can understand, and go Google how to figure out the present value of money. If I can say to Mario, look, Mario, I can get you another 2%. Present value of money is this. Can you go from net 60 to net 15? Now all of a sudden I can get to net 20, net 30. Procurement loses nothing from net. And I wouldn't say all. A lot of what procurement is judged on is how much of a discount they get. What's their delta, right? They got a big old leaderboard and a pipeline too. This deal, and here's the current, and here's the market rate, and here's all this stuff. So that's another one. The last piece I'll say on this, and I'll shut up because I know I'm ranting a lot, but you asked me here. The interesting thing is, when you get to that pricing discussion, earlier in the pricing discussion, they say, well, we'd like a discount of this percent. One of the first things you can just say, hey, I understand you're asking. It makes sense. Everybody asks. Our pricing is based on what the market will bear. What would you like? How would you like to proceed? Again, Mario brought it up of like, well, the competition. So I knew where I was going. There's not a CFO or a procurement person that I've run into in 10 plus years of this, where they know how to answer that question, but they don't know how to respond to what the market will bear. Because if they have done their research, they know I'm right. Now, if there's somebody coming in at a 30% discount, okay, well, I better know that that's what that company does, and I better know how I differentiate and show the economic impact to that. So anyway, I'll shut up on that topic, but I always like to make sure people have all these little thoughts that are in the head, because because a lot of times people will be there, oh, we can't use their logo, or they're not going to give me a quote. General Electric's not going to even let me mention them as a customer, or whatever. So okay, we'll ask for net terms.
So it's funny you mentioned that, because in our Vingresso LLC days, we had well over 200 clients that we worked with, from the largest of large Cisco's all the way down to the world's largest vanilla extract company with 15 sellers, Virginia Dare, right? Every statement of work that went out had a mandate of 3 things. You will be a customer reference, you will be a customer, do a testimonial video, and we do get to use your logo.
It's in my contract too, dude. Like, it's like, make them redline that stuff out.
Exactly. And so it's like, when we negotiate this, it's like, okay, well, let's save this topic. Like, let's get to the easy stuff first. I like when they come on the call. Let's get to the easy stuff here. We'll never allow this. Like, well, actually, this is pretty important to us. This is why we gave you the pricing that we gave you, was in exchange for being able to get these elements here. well, we just don't do that. Okay, well, let's get through all the other stuff before we get back to this, right?
Well, then the price goes up. So
yeah, exactly. Well, because now exactly.
There's a couple of thoughts too. I just want to bring this up is that legal and procurement sometimes are separate departments. And if you're not careful, I call it getting unbundled. You think that your contract and your pricing are tied together, they're bundled together. They don't. So if legal starts to redline stuff, but you've agreed to some pricing over here, but legal says you got to take this stuff out, well, now you've got a problem. And the biggest problem you're going to have is internally, where you're like, God, we just gave them that price, but now they're taking this stuff out. And now you got to go battle internally and get blamed for something that nobody ever trained you on how to do in the first place. So be mindful of this unbundling thing. And you can agree to like, hey, I think we can do that, but I've got to confirm with procurement. Or, hey, procurement, I can look at that, but I got to wait till I see what legal changes. Because if legal changes something, then everything changes, right? So, but I agree with you 100%. That stuff should be in your contract. And you'd be surprised how many companies and big companies don't even redline it out. They don't even redline it out. And it doesn't mean I go back to everyone and force them to do it, right? So, but it's there and it makes that part a whole lot easier. You don't have to go get permission.
So we started analyzing our contracts, and in 70% of all of our contracts, we had a guarantee that we can use their logo, we can use their video testimonial, we can build a case study. And then what we did is in the negotiations for those other 30% that said absolutely not, we got it down to, we can at least use your logo, right? And we gave up in exchange for some other term, because like this was super important to us. And so those are like, anybody listening in right now, if you are not listening to what Richard and I are saying, go march into your legals teams and say, modify our statement of work, our order form, our contract, modify it right now. And
absolutely.
And whatever you use, CSA, MSA, and say, add in these 3 elements and bury it in the terms and conditions, and then use that as a leverage point. You'll be amazed at how many companies will say, yes, we'll do that, right?
And it makes sense for you to have a meaningful conversation around when the discount comes up.
Yes.
It shows this give-get piece, right? That's a really important piece. The last thing that I would say around the shoot, I forgot what it was. It'll come back in and I'll interrupt whatever we go.
That's okay. Let me give you this one. So we had a contract that we did, and procurement came back to it, and they had redlined it. And one of the clauses they had put into the contract was that they wanted the right to be able to terminate for convenience. Okay, that we've seen that before, no problem.
So much for the ARR.
Yeah, well. So here was the gotcha. The gotcha are our terms and conditions already covered that, which is if you terminate for convenience, then you have the fees that you would have to still pay for the remainder of the term, because that helps to lock it in, right? The ARR. So they came back and they added in a whole new clause, and it was basically they wanted the rights to terminate for convenience, and get this, we'll prepay you the money, but whatever we don't use, you have to pay us back. That was what they had inside there. And so I looked at this and I said, this is the oddest request I've ever seen. So basically, we are signing a contract with no contract. And they said, what do you mean by that? I said, this is a contract with no contract. Essentially, you pay us $100,000. And in 1 month from now, you say, I'm canceling for convenience, and now I owe you 90.
Mm-hmm.
So wait a minute, there's no contract. They're like, well, of course there's a contract. I said, there's no contract, nor is there a term.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I'll tell you what you do. If you really want this clause in, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to charge you double the price. So instead of $100,000, it's $200,000 with the right to cancel. And oh, by the way, let me ask you this question. If a customer said to you, because they sell products, if a customer said and put this clause to you and your legal team, which legal was on the phone with me, what would be your reaction? What would be your reaction to this and they were quiet on the phone. Nobody had a word to say. And I said, by your silence,
that's the best.
It indicates that you would not accept a term like this, because this is a term that is just so
unreasonable,
crazy. Like, who does that? That's not a contract, right? So if you want to terminate something, by all means, you have the right to terminate, but you still have the penalty, which is you owe the money, right? So unless, of course, there's a material breach.
And you just use the word "but" the right way, right? Okay, you want to do that, but if you do, because now I'm going to disagree with everything you said. So this was the thing that came back to me. When you get introduced to procurement, one of the first pieces, this is what my buddy Alan taught me, is to say, hey, Mario, thank you. I know we're going to talk about commercial terms at some point, Mario. Can you help me understand a little bit, though, about your role? Like, are you just guiding me through the process? Are you a liaison to legal? Like, I want to make sure that when I'm working with you, I get we're going to have a commercial term discussion. I just don't want to be that pain in the butt vendor that you sometimes get. So help me understand how you do this in your role. By the way, that is the best way to introduce yourself to procurement, because now it's just like sales. It's all about them. It's all about their pain. It's all about their time. And we aren't seen as this confrontational, jerky salesperson. So anyway, that was what I had forgotten, but I wanted to make sure we got to that part too.
One of my favorite stories is we were negotiating $1 million contract, Richard. And I had the Gong recorder on the Zoom call, and we were negotiating 2-hour session. Procurement and legal were on. Myself and my legal was on, and we got to a very, very, very sticky term, and it was the rights to terminate for convenience. The one I just talked about. This is a separate contract, different company, different contract, and they had some very stringent terms for that they wanted to include. So anyways, we spent about 25 minutes on this topic alone, right? A 2-hour call, 25 minutes, right? So we go through that. And at the end, in principle, we find agreement. And so they said, who's going to take the action item to write this language? And my legal team said, we will. We'll take the language
yes.
to write this. And so they said, okay. And they said, let me just recap. They recapped on the call. Is this what we're agreeing to? And their legal said, yes. Okay. All right. So now, 2 days later, we send over the new agreement, and we said, here you go. 2 weeks later, we get a response back from procurement and legal from the customer. And the big red line in this version now was the red line to the red line, and they wanted to wipe out the whole clause. And so we said, hey, we are, looking at these 10 clauses that we have left. We saw that you wiped out what it is that we agreed to. Procurement responds back with, we never agreed to that. And I respond back with, yes, you did. And they respond back with, no, we didn't. This is not the principle that we wanted. We said we wanted this. And then I turned around, I went to Gong.
Yep.
I grabbed the snippet of the recording and the transcript, and I sent it to their legal and their procurement. And I said, you may not have realized what you agreed to, but in fact, you agreed to this. And so we're not in a position to go back on what we already agreed to unless you want to pay a higher fee. So if that's the case, let me know, and then it'll be a 50% increase in the fees, because this is not something that we would accept at this price. And so that recording saved me $1 million account.
There you go.
I got it. And then what happened was I called the business owner up and I said, business owner, I want you to know what procurement and legal are trying to do. And they said, what? We agreed to that. What did you put in? And I read the clause exactly as we had it. And they said, that's exactly what we agreed to. I said, I know, I was on the call. She said, I'm calling up the chief procurement officer. So she called up the chief procurement officer and said, this is out of control. Your team is adding no value whatsoever except slowing down me accomplishing what I need to accomplish. And so we had the business owner in this case on our side. But those are the types of experiences where, you get procurement and then they do these tactics like a 2-week-long delay to respond and then say, we never agreed to anything like that. And but the crazy part is did you not think I would pull out the transcript?
Well, no, and again, there is procurement training, by the way, which I'm going to go take at some point. And they delay it for 2 weeks. One, there is a priority thing. Like, they got a lot of stuff on their plate. In fairness, they have a job to do. I get it. And they know that we'll get desperate when it gets closer to the deadline.
Exactly. When it gets started, end of month, end of quarter, end of year.
Yeah. Yep. So,
and that's the sad part is individuals, we've trained buyers on this journey to buy at certain points in time. That's what we've trained them to do. But that's the very unfortunate thing. Well, listen, Richard, it's been fabulous having discussion. Again, name of the book and where can people go get it?
The Seller's Journey, it is on Amazon and anywhere else. Kindle is going to be there, and Barnes and Noble, people like that. And there's a ton, wherever you can get it online, it'll be online. So it's going through all those distribution places. Here's what it looks like one more time. I appreciate anybody taking a look at it. Yes, my real email address is in there. And if you hate the book, I'll send you your money back. Just send me an email with your Venmo and I'll do it.
Sounds good. And if someone wants to get a hold of you, connect with you, is it Twitter, LinkedIn, email? What's the best way?
415-596-9149. 415-596-9149. Mario, you know that's my real number because you and I text messages back and forth. And yes, you can find me on LinkedIn.
So make sure if you're reaching out to Richard Harris on LinkedIn, please send him a personalized connection request and say you heard him on the Modern Selling Podcast. Don't just click the connect button because he will have no idea where you're from.
And I judge you. We didn't even go down that path, but I judge every connection request. So we should talk about that one day.
Oh man, that's a good one. I have over 75 sitting in my box. I use them for trainings and I use them to show sales reps. Here, let's go through what you see here. What do you think? That having been said, I feel bad for some of these folks that are, sending out this crap. But nonetheless, Richard, it's been fabulous having you on the show. I have one last question for you, and that is your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
Shawshank Redemption.
Shawshank Redemption. We've had that at least 3 or 4 handfuls of time. But that's a popular movie, and appreciate you sharing that insights. And all of you listening in right now, hey, don't turn that dial quite yet. Listen to this very important message now. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Oh, and don't forget, if you'd like to save 20 hours or more in a month and increase your productivity, go right now and download Fly Message, that's flymsg.io, for free. It's your free text expander and personal writing assistant. Hey, thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.